If your parents only love you when you're successful, did they ever love you at all? I used to believe that family was unconditional, that no matter what happened, your parents would always stand by you, support you, and be proud of you. But I was wrong. Love, in my family, came with conditions. I learned this the day I told them I wasn't going into finance. The moment the words left my mouth, it was like I had ceased to exist. My father, Jonathan Hart, barely looked at me. My mother, Helena, just sighed like I was a disappointment she had long suspected. And Scarlett, my younger sister, my parents' pride and joy, just smirked. Of course she was their favorite. She did everything they expected of her. A degree from Wharton, a high-ranking position at the family firm, a perfect engagement to a man from another wealthy family. And me? I was the black sheep. The one who wasted my potential on something as meaningless as artificial intelligence. I should have been used to it. The whispers at family events, the passive-aggressive comments from my mother about how I was wasting my time. The fact that they didn't even bother to introduce me as their daughter in important circles. But it still stung when Scarlett's wedding invitation arrived, with a quiet warning attached. Don't make a scene, Vivian. Don't embarrass the family. You don't belong in this world. What they didn't know was that by the time I stepped into that wedding, I wouldn't be the failure they thought I was. Because while they dismissed me, I built an empire. This is a true story, found on our /true off my chest, where people share the raw and painful truths about family, love, and betrayal. Have you ever been the disappointment in your family? Let's talk about it in the comments. And if you want more real stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for Reddit True Vault. Because some stories aren't just meant to be told, they're meant to be heard. I was born into power. The Hart family wasn't just wealthy. They were an institution in New York's financial world. For generations, my family built their empire on investments, hedge funds, and high-stakes deals that shaped entire industries. They weren't just successful, they expected success. To them, money wasn't just currency. It was legacy, it was purpose, it was identity. And for a while, I was a part of that world. When I was little, my parents adored me. I was the firstborn, the heiress to the Hart empire. My father would lift me onto his desk and tell me, "One day, you'll sit here and run everything, just like me." My mother would proudly introduce me to her friends as the future of the family. For a while, I believed them. But then, Scarlett was born. Scarlett, the perfect daughter. The one who never questioned the family legacy, who excelled in numbers and thrived in the structured world of finance. She was everything they wanted. And I made the mistake of being different. It started small. At 10 years old, I became obsessed with computers. While other kids were playing outside, I was teaching myself to code. By 12, I was sneaking into my father's office not to look at stock reports, but to experiment with financial algorithms, fascinated by how data could predict human behavior. But my family didn't see potential in what I was doing. They saw rebellion. When I was 13, I built my first AI program. Nothing groundbreaking, just a basic model designed to analyze market trends. I excitedly showed my father, expecting him to be impressed. Instead, he barely glanced at it before setting it aside. "Vivian," he said, his voice flat, "this is a distraction. If you're so interested in numbers, focus on finance like Scarlett." That was the first time I felt invisible. At 14, Scarlett aced her first advanced economics class. My parents threw a dinner party in her honor, toasting to her bright future in the family business. That same year, I won a national coding competition. My mother barely looked up from her wine glass when I told her, "That's nice, dear. But how will that help you in the real world?" By 16, the difference in treatment was undeniable. Scarlett was groomed for greatness. Private mentorships, prestigious internships, every resource at her fingertips. I, on the other hand, was expected to stay out of the way. "AI is just a trend," my father told me once. "You'll grow out of it. Eventually, you'll come to your senses and follow the real path." I didn't grow out of it. The moment I realized I was truly unwanted was my high school graduation. I graduated with honors, but the only congratulations I got was a distracted nod from my mother. Scarlett had been accepted into Wharton that year. They were already planning the celebration for her. That night, I overheard my father talking to one of his business partners. "Scarlett will take over the company in a few years," he said proudly. "Vivian, well, maybe she can be her assistant." I was nothing to them. Not a daughter. Not an heir. Just an afterthought. I should have confronted them. I should have screamed, demanded to know why I wasn't enough. Instead, I stayed silent. Because deep down, I already knew the answer. I wasn't meant to be part of their world. And one day, I'd prove that I didn't need to be. But before that day came, I had to lose everything they once made me believe was mine. 18. That was the age I stopped being their daughter. Most people mark adulthood with milestones: graduation, moving out, their first job. For me, it was a conversation. A single conversation that severed me from the family I had once belonged to. It happened in my father's office. That room wasn't just where billion-dollar deals were made. It was where decisions were final, where my father's word dictated reality. I had walked in knowing something was wrong. There was a weight in the air, an unspoken tension, the kind that tells you you're about to lose something you can't get back. Jonathan Hart sat behind his massive mahogany desk, his hands folded neatly, his face unreadable. My mother, Helena, was on the leather couch, legs crossed, poised as ever. There was a faint look of pity on her face, but not the kind that stemmed from love. No, it was the kind reserved for someone making a mistake too big to come back from. And then there was Scarlett, standing by the window, watching the skyline like she wasn't a part of this at all. I remember thinking how fitting it was. She was always looking ahead, toward the future they had built for her. And I was the past they were ready to leave behind. My father was the first to speak. He didn't waste time. He never did. He laid it out like a business transaction, clear-cut, without emotion. Either I pursued a future in finance, enrolled in Wharton, and prepared to take my place in the family, or I walked away from all of it. Walk away from them, from the Hart name, from everything they had built. There was no middle ground, no compromise. And for a moment, just one brief, fleeting moment, I considered what it would mean to say yes, to stay, to give up AI, to give up the work that made me feel alive, to trade it all for a corner office in one of their banks, a title that would never truly be mine, a life spent in the shadow of my father's legacy. Would they love me then? Would they look at me the way they looked at Scarlett? Would I finally be enough? The thought made me sick, because deep down, I knew the answer. It wasn't just about my career. It was about control. Jonathan Hart didn't raise children. He built successors. He didn't care about my dreams, my ambitions, or what I wanted. He cared about ensuring that the Hart Empire remained exactly as it had always been. If I wanted to stay, I had to erase the parts of myself that didn't fit into his vision. I had to become someone else entirely. And I refused. I think that was the first time I truly understood what it meant to be invisible. I had been erased from their future long before they asked me to leave. The silence stretched between us, heavy, suffocating. My mother exhaled, long and slow, as if this whole situation was just exhausting for her. As if my refusal was a burden she had to bear. Then she reached into her handbag. The moment I saw her take out her checkbook, I felt something inside me break. She was still composed, elegant, the perfect image of a woman who never let emotions get the best of her. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't beg me to reconsider. Instead, she wrote a number down, ripped the paper from the booklet with the same careful precision she did everything, and placed it neatly on the desk between us. A check, a single piece of paper. That was all it took to put a price on love. She told me to take it, to use it to survive, but most importantly, to not embarrass them. If I insisted on throwing my life away, I could at least do it quietly. That was the moment I understood. They had never been afraid of losing me, because to them, I was never someone worth losing. I was a failed investment, nothing more. I remember looking at Scarlett, searching for something, anything, a flicker of regret, a protest, some sign that she thought this was wrong. But she didn't move. She didn't speak. She didn't even look at me. She just stood there, silent, indifferent. She had already chosen. And for the first time in my life, I chose myself too. I picked up the check, but not because I wanted their money. I took it because I knew, in that moment, that this was the last thing they would ever give me. And with that, I turned and walked out of the office. That was the last time I ever called that house my home. But leaving wasn't the hardest part. It was everything that came after. Starting over wasn't just hard. It was brutal. I had walked away from wealth, from security, from everything that was supposed to guarantee success. And for what? A dream? A belief that I could build something on my own. Without the weight of the Hart name holding me down, reality hit fast. The world didn't care that I had once belonged to one of the most powerful families in New York. The name Hart meant nothing outside of their carefully curated circles. Out here, I wasn't an heiress. I wasn't a prodigy. I was just another broke 20-something trying to survive in a city that chewed people up and spat them out without a second thought. And the city made sure I learned that lesson the hard way. Rent came first. Food came second. And sleep? That was a luxury I couldn't afford. My days were a relentless cycle of working dead-end jobs, taking online courses, cold emailing investors, and getting doors slammed in my face. I waited tables until my feet felt like they were on fire, only to come home and spend another 6 hours coding in the dark. And yet, no matter how exhausted I was, no matter how many hours I worked or how many meals I skipped, it never seemed to be enough. The worst part wasn't the exhaustion. It wasn't even the hunger or the constant anxiety of whether I'd make rent that month. It was the doubt, not just from others, but from myself. Because no matter how badly I wanted to believe in myself, every rejection chipped away at whatever confidence I had left. Every time I pitched my AI platform, I was met with the same condescending looks. Investors humored me, but their answers were always the same. It's too ambitious. There's no market for this. Tech isn't really a place for people like you. People like me. They never said it outright, but I knew what they meant. A young woman with no backing, no connections in Silicon Valley, no financial safety net to fall back on. I was a risk they weren't willing to take. And maybe, just maybe, they were right. I wasn't some tech genius. I didn't have an Ivy League degree in computer science or a billionaire mentor guiding me. I was just a girl who had spent years obsessed with AI, who had taught herself how to build predictive models in the dim glow of a secondhand laptop. And in the world I was trying to break into, that wasn't enough. I failed. Again, and again, and again. I lost track of how many times I heard the word no. How many times I sat in a crumbling apartment, staring at another rejection email, telling myself that this was the last one. That maybe my parents were right. Maybe I should have just swallowed my pride and gone back. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered the way my father had looked at me when I told him I was leaving. How he had sighed, shaking his head, already certain of my failure. People like you don't build empires, Vivian. They work for people like us. That was the moment I knew I couldn't quit. Because every time I failed, I wasn't just proving my father right. I was letting him win. So I pushed forward. I spent years teaching myself everything: coding, algorithm design, market analysis. I built prototypes that crashed. I pitched to investors who laughed in my face. I watched companies with half my talent and twice my connections soar past me, signing the kind of deals I could only dream of. And still, I kept going. There were nights I sat on the cold floor of my apartment, running simulations until the sun came up. Days where I showed up to meetings with no money for coffee, just hoping someone would finally believe in what I was building. No one did, until someone did. It didn't happen in a grand, cinematic moment. There was no dramatic handshake, no instant validation. It started with a single investor who saw something in my work, someone who wasn't interested in my last name or my pedigree, but in the raw potential of what I was building. That was all I needed. One opportunity. That first investor led to another, then another, and suddenly, the same people who had once dismissed me were now paying attention. The same firms that told me AI wasn't a safe investment were now scrambling to get a piece of what I had built, because what I had built worked. After years of coding in the dark, of testing, failing, and refining, my AI platform was more accurate than anything on the market. It didn't just predict trends, it understood them. It adapted, evolved, and processed financial data in ways even Wall Street's best analysts couldn't. And one day, an investment firm saw what no one else had. They saw the potential. They saw the years of research, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices. They saw me, and they wrote a check for $50 million. $50 million. I stared at the number on the contract for what felt like an eternity. Not out of shock, not out of disbelief, but because for the first time in my life, I had done something that was entirely mine. I had done it without a single cent from my family, and I wasn't done yet. They could pretend I didn't exist. They could ignore the headlines, dismiss the interviews, even refuse to acknowledge my name in conversations. But the world wasn't going to let them forget me. For years, my family had ruled over New York's financial elite, a dynasty built on generations of wealth and power. The Hart name was synonymous with influence, control, and success, the kind measured in stocks, mergers, and market dominance. And I had walked away from all of it. When my company's breakthrough AI technology landed me on the front page of Forbes under the headline, "The Woman Changing the Future of Finance," I didn't expect a congratulatory call from my parents. I didn't expect anything at all, really. But part of me was still curious. What would they say? How would they react? The answer came quickly: silence. Not a single word from my mother, who had once meticulously kept track of every financial milestone Scarlett achieved. not an acknowledgement from my father, whose very existence revolved around the movement of wealth. And Scarlett? She didn't say anything either. But I knew her too well to believe that meant she hadn't noticed. I wasn't looking for validation from them. Not anymore. But as my name continued to rise, I could feel the weight of their silence pressing harder. It wasn't just avoidance, it was intentional dismissal. They weren't just ignoring my success, they were pretending it didn't exist. At first, I found it amusing. A part of me even expected it. Gigoitsong ne ti gi, my mother had once scoffed. People only respect those who control the money. She genuinely believed that. To her, no matter how advanced my AI became, no matter how many billions in investments it attracted, it would always be a novelty. A tool. Something used by the real power players, the financiers, the bankers, the deal makers. She never understood that in this new world, data was currency. And I was the one controlling it. Scarlett, however, couldn't ignore me as easily. For most of our lives, she had been the star, the golden child, the only heart daughter that mattered. She wore the title with pride, carrying our family's legacy like it was a crown meant only for her. But the tides were shifting. At high-profile events, investors started asking about me instead of her. My company's name began circulating in the very circles my family had once ruled. And worst of all, people started making comparisons. She's brilliant, just like Scarlett. No, maybe even sharper. I could only imagine how that must have felt for her. For someone who had always been the standard of excellence in our family, suddenly realizing she might not be the brightest name in the Hart lineage anymore. It didn't matter that I had never competed with her, that I had never tried to take her place. In Scarlett's world, there was no such thing as equality. There were winners and losers. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if she was winning anymore. Then came the night everything changed. It was an exclusive financial gala, the kind of event my family had been attending for decades. CEOs, hedge fund managers, and political figures all in one place, drinking champagne and making deals worth billions over casual conversation. Scarlett was in her element, poised and perfect in an elegant navy gown, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries like royalty. And I was there too. I hadn't planned on attending, but an invitation found its way to me, delivered not by my family, but by someone who actually wanted me there. So I walked in, dressed in deep emerald silk, an unspoken challenge wrapped in luxury. I wasn't the girl they once dismissed, drowning in oversized hoodies and working out of coffee shops. I had built something. I belonged here. The shift in energy was immediate. Scarlett noticed the moment I stepped into the room. I saw her eyes flicker over me, a careful mask slipping into place. But what she hadn't prepared for was what happened next. Across the hall, Michael Bloomberg. Yes, that Bloomberg, the billionaire media mogul and former mayor of New York, turned away from a conversation and made a direct path toward me. "Vivian Hart," he greeted, extending his hand with an approving nod. "I've been meaning to meet you. Your work is nothing short of revolutionary." I shook his hand, a polite smile on my lips. "I appreciate that." From the corner of my eye, I saw Scarlett freeze. The man, someone my parents had spent years trying to impress, had walked right past her. No handshake, no greeting, nothing. And in that moment, I knew. She felt it. For the first time, she wasn't the most important heart in the room. As the night went on, I found myself in deep conversation with some of the most powerful names in finance and technology. Elena Rothschild, a venture capitalist whose firm had funded my first major AI project, introduced me to Nathan Sinclair, the CEO of one of the world's top investment firms. "I've been following your work," Sinclair said, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Your AI predictions have been outperforming our top analysts. That's something we need to talk about." Scarlett, a few feet away, could hear every word. She had spent her life being courted by men like Sinclair, fighting for their recognition. But tonight, they weren't looking at her. They were looking at me. I didn't stay long. I had no interest in proving a point to people who had already decided I wasn't worth their time. But as I left, I caught Scarlett staring at me from across the gala, her jaw set, her grip tightening around the stem of her champagne glass. I recognized that look. It was the same one I had seen on my own face years ago, back when I was the one feeling small in her shadow. But I wasn't small anymore. Later that night, as I stepped into my car, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I hadn't seen in years. "Scarlett, we need to talk." I stared at the screen, unreadable emotions swirling in my chest. For most of my life, I had waited for my family to recognize my worth. Now, they didn't have a choice, because whether they liked it or not, the world already had. But success has a way of making itself known, whether people are ready to accept it or not. And soon, they would have no choice but to see me. I never planned on going. Not really. The Hart family's annual gala was one of the biggest financial and political networking events in New York. Every year, the wealthiest, most powerful figures in the city gathered under one roof, sipping champagne, discussing market shifts, and forging alliances worth billions. This was their world, polished, controlled, exclusive. It was never mine. Then, an email arrived. A personal invitation from James Whitmore, the founder of Whitmore Capital, one of the most influential investment firms in the country. The message was brief but unmistakably direct, making it clear that my presence at the event was more than just a courtesy. It was an expectation. James Whitmore was not a man who wasted time. If he wanted to speak with me, it meant something. And so, despite every instinct telling me to stay far away, I found myself standing outside the Hart estate that evening, dressed in midnight blue, with my company's latest valuation, $150 million, circulating in whispers among the elite. Inside, the gala was everything I remembered: shimmering chandeliers, servers weaving through the crowd with silver trays, and conversations laced with veiled arrogance. Power radiated from every corner of the room. My parents thrived in this environment, seamlessly moving between New York's financial titans, their expressions carefully crafted masks of sophistication. Scarlett was at my mother's side, poised as ever, every bit the golden daughter they had always wanted. And I was invisible. There were no introductions, no acknowledgments, not a single mention of my presence, as if erasing me from the family's narrative was the most natural thing in the world. I should have expected it. But knowing something and experiencing it are two different things. I wasn't here as their daughter. I was here as an outsider. But then, the moment came. The shift was subtle at first. A murmur spreading through the room, a few heads turning, eyes widening ever so slightly. Then, the weight of a collective gaze settled over me, as if the very air had thickened with expectation. James Whitmore had arrived. There was no grand announcement, no need for one. His presence alone was enough to command attention. Conversations quieted as he moved through the crowd, deliberate, confident, the kind of man who dictated the flow of a room simply by existing within it. And then, he walked straight toward me. I could feel the weight of 100 eyes following his every step. The moment stretched, thick with unspoken questions. My grip tightened around the stem of my champagne glass, but my expression remained steady. Then, in a voice that cut through the hush of the room, he addressed me. My name, Vivian Hart, spoken with the weight of respect, not obligation. He acknowledged my work, the impact I had on the AI industry, the way my company was shaping the future. Silence. Complete, deafening silence. I didn't need to turn around to see the reactions behind me. I could feel them. The tension in my mother's posture, the sudden stillness in my father's carefully measured movements, the faltering confidence in Scarlett's expression. Then, James Whitmore shifted his attention. This time, his words were directed toward my parents. A remark so casual, yet so deliberate, that it felt like a seismic shift beneath their feet. Recognition. I could still hear his voice, smooth and measured, carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Scarlett is talented in finance. That's good. But your eldest daughter, Vivian Hart, she is the future of technology. There it was, spoken in front of New York's most powerful investors, CEOs, and industry leaders. Not as an afterthought, not as a reluctant acknowledgement, but as an undeniable fact. And for the first time, my parents had no choice but to listen, not for Scarlett, not for the Hart name, but for me. For the first time in my life, they had to hear it from someone they respected, someone whose approval mattered more in their world than their own daughters ever could. I stole a glance at Scarlett then. For years, she had been the sun around which our family revolved. But tonight, in this room full of power and influence, she wasn't the one people were watching. I was. The moment was quiet, but it was absolute. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider. I belonged. And then, reality intruded. At first, I thought Scarlett's message was just another power move. 3 simple words. We need to talk. Not a request. A command. It carried the same entitlement she had always wielded so effortlessly, the expectation that I would drop everything because she had finally deemed me worth her time. I ignored it. For days, my phone continued to buzz. Some messages were short and clipped, others more carefully worded, as if she was trying to gauge the right approach. Some even had a forced casualness, as if she wanted to pretend she wasn't reaching out because she needed something. But I knew better. This wasn't about sisterly concern. It wasn't even about family. Scarlett wanted to know how I had done it. How the sister she once dismissed, mocked, and disregarded had managed to build something undeniable. How I had stepped outside the Golden Heart legacy and created an empire of my own. And maybe, more than anything, she wanted to understand how it had all happened without her. Scarlett had always been the golden child. She had played the part so well, polished, poised, the embodiment of everything our family valued. And for most of my life, I had believed in her brilliance too. She was the one who carried our parents' expectations, the one groomed for success, the one who was supposed to lead the next generation of the Hart dynasty. She had been untouchable, and then, suddenly, she wasn't. The shift wasn't immediate. It started with small moments, hesitations, fleeting glances, an edge of uncertainty creeping into her once unshakable confidence. But I knew exactly when everything finally cracked. The night of the gala had been a turning point. For the first time, Scarlett wasn't the most sought-after person in the room. The power brokers, the CEOs, the financial elites, they had looked past her and turned their attention to me. And that was something she had never prepared for. For the first time in her life, Scarlett Hart was second place. I didn't hear from her again for a while. Then, one evening, an unexpected headline appeared in my news feed. Scarlett Hart backs ambitious AI startup. Investment collapses after valuation miscalculation. I read it twice. Then again, Scarlett had invested in an AI company. The same sister who once rolled her eyes at my work, who dismissed my ideas as trendy nonsense, had thrown millions into a field she had once deemed worthless. And she had failed, badly. Her investment had crumbled under its own weight. Poor planning, a weak technological foundation, miscalculated projections. Analysts speculated that she had underestimated the industry, that she had assumed financial power alone would be enough to secure success. It wasn't just a misstep, it was a public embarrassment. And for the first time in my life, I felt something I never thought I'd feel toward my sister. Not satisfaction, not vindication, pity. A week later, she finally appeared. It was strange to see her like that. Scarlett, always immaculate, always composed, looking hesitant. She had lost none of her sharpness, but there was something missing. The effortless confidence, the quiet arrogance. She wasn't broken, but she wasn't invincible anymore, either. For a long time, she had believed she was untouchable, that she had played the game so well that she could never lose. And then she had lost. I didn't know what finally pushed her to show up at my office. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the realization that, for once, she couldn't fix this with a well-placed connection or a strategically worded press release. Maybe, for the first time in her life, she had no one else to turn to. Scarlett had always dismissed my career, but now, as she sat across from me, there was no trace of condescension. No carefully crafted remarks about my so-called hobby. No offhand comments about my lack of financial acumen. Instead, there was only one question. How did you do it? She didn't say the words out loud, but I saw them in her face. How had I built something greater than her without the privileges she had always relied on? How had I survived without their approval? How had I thrived without it? For a long moment, I said nothing. And then, finally, I told her. I didn't do it to prove her wrong. I didn't do it to be better than her. I had never tried to beat her. I had simply stopped trying to be her. She had spent her whole life defining success through a single lens. Power, control, dominance. The same values our parents had instilled in us since childhood. But success, real success, wasn't about beating someone else. It was about choosing your own path, even when no one believed in it. Scarlett sat there for a long time, absorbing my words. And then, in a rare moment of honesty, she admitted something that I had never expected. She had always thought I was naive, that I didn't understand the rules of the world we were born into, that I had walked away not out of strength, but out of weakness. But then she had tried to follow my path, and she had failed. For the first time, she understood something that had never crossed her mind before. It wasn't that I had rejected success. It was that I had built it differently. Scarlett didn't apologize that day. There were no grand gestures, no emotional reconciliations. But something shifted. For the first time, she stopped seeing me as a failure. And maybe, just maybe, she started seeing me as something else. An equal. Scarlett wasn't the only one who had started seeing me differently. And slowly, quietly, so did they. It didn't happen overnight. There was no dramatic apology. No grand declaration of regret. But something changed. At first, it was so subtle that I barely noticed. A pause in my mother's usual sharp remarks. A hesitation before my father dismissed a news article about AI. Small moments that, at the time, I brushed off as coincidence. I had spent over a decade teaching myself to expect nothing from them. To believe that whatever love they had for me had been lost the moment I chose a different path. But then, the signs became harder to ignore. I found out from an old family friend that my father had been attending AI conferences. Not as a speaker, not as an investor, but as a listener. A man who had once scoffed at my career choice, who told me that real power is in finance, not in programming, was now sitting in rooms filled with engineers and researchers, quietly trying to understand the world I had built for myself. My mother, who once dismissed every milestone in my career, started watching interviews where I spoke. She never mentioned it to me, but I knew. One of my employees, whose mother was part of the same social circles, casually brought it up over lunch. Your mom was at a luncheon last week. She told everyone she watched your TED Talk on AI ethics. I think she was proud. I didn't know how to react. Pride. That was never a word I associated with my parents when it came to me. For years, they had measured my worth against Scarlett's, and I had always come up short. But now, without a word, they were paying attention. Not because they needed me, not because they wanted money or influence, but because, for the first time, they were trying to understand me. Then there was Scarlett. She had always been the untouchable one, the perfect daughter, the heir to the Hart Empire. And yet, one morning, I walked into my office to find her waiting. She wasn't dressed in her usual designer perfection. No intimidating posture, no sharp words poised like weapons. Instead, she stood there, holding a simple folder, looking more uncertain than I had ever seen her. I want to start over, she had said, not as an investor, not as an executive, as an employee. Scarlett Hart, the woman who had been handed everything, who had once mocked my useless career, was now asking to start at the bottom. At first, I thought it was some kind of joke, some elaborate move to save face or regain control. But then I saw the way she held herself, not with arrogance, but with quiet resolve. She wasn't asking for power. She wasn't asking for an easy way in. She was asking to learn. And I let her, not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted to see her struggle the way I had, but because, for the first time in our lives, Scarlett was finally trying to meet me where I was. But nothing shook me more than the day I received a message from my mother. No long-winded justification. No passive-aggressive remark hidden between carefully chosen words. Just a simple question. Are you okay? That was it. It was the first time in over a decade that she had asked me something that wasn't about status, reputation, or obligation. The first time she had spoken to me not as a disappointment or a failure, but as her daughter. I sat there staring at the screen for a long time, unable to process what I was feeling. She didn't say, "I'm sorry." She didn't ask me to come back. But for the first time in my life, my mother, the same woman who once told me I didn't belong in the Hart family, was reaching out not because she needed something from me, but because, for the first time, she wanted to know if I was happy. I didn't reply right away. I didn't know how to, but I did something I never thought I would. I saved the message, not as proof, not as leverage, but because, no matter how much pain had existed between us, it meant something. And maybe, just maybe, it was the first step towards something real. Top of form, bottom of form. Forgiveness isn't about waiting for an apology. It's about seeing change, real, undeniable change. And for the first time, I wasn't the only one fighting for this family. 2 years. That's how long it had been since that night at the gala. Since Scarlett first walked into my office, leaving behind her world to learn mine. 14 years. That's how long it had been since I packed my things, walked out of the Hart estate, and never looked back. And now, for the first time since that night, we were all sitting at the same table. It wasn't some extravagant banquet, no high-end catering, no gold-plated cutlery. Just a simple dinner in a quiet restaurant on the Upper East Side. A place small enough that no one would whisper our names or judge the seating arrangement. For the first time in my life, it didn't feel like we were a family bound by legacy. Just a family. It had started with Scarlett. She didn't ask for shortcuts. She didn't demand favors. She worked, quietly, methodically. I watched her go from someone who scoffed at AI to someone who studied it, respected it, understood it. She had once worn power like an armor, but now, she carried competence like a weapon. A year into working at my company, she walked into my office, not to complain, not to ask for validation, but to present a fully developed financial strategy. No hesitation, no expectation of handouts. It was impressive, and for the first time, when I looked at my sister, I didn't see a competitor. I saw someone who had fought her own battle, against her own ignorance, against her own arrogance, and won. Scarlett Hart, the golden child, had rebuilt herself from the ground up. Maybe that was her way of saying sorry. My mother's change wasn't loud either. She didn't apologize. She never would. But one day, during an investor meeting, I overheard something that made me pause. Vivian is incredibly sharp. Her company is leading the AI revolution. She didn't know I was standing behind her when she said it. She didn't say it for me to hear. She just said it, like she meant it. And that meant more than any apology ever could. But the one I never expected to change was my father. Jonathan Hart was never a man of many words. His approval wasn't given. It was earned, bought, or inherited. And for most of my life, I had none of those things in his eyes. But something shifted. It was subtle at first. An article he sent me about machine learning. A forwarded email about an AI breakthrough. No message attached. Just sent. Then, a question. How do AI models self-correct? The first time he asked, I thought it was rhetorical. It wasn't. And when I explained it to him, he listened, not out of obligation. Not because he was waiting for his turn to speak. He listened. Jonathan Hart, the man who once told me that people like me were meant to work for people like Scarlett, now sat across from me, genuinely interested in how my work reshaped the world. He didn't say he was proud of me, but for the first time, he looked at me like he was. And somehow that was enough. Which brings us to tonight. For people, one table, a family that had once been broken, trying to figure out how to piece itself back together. Scarlett sat across from me, scanning the menu like she was studying a market report. She had grown into someone I respected, not because she was my sister, but because she had finally stopped hiding behind privilege and started earning her place. My mother sat next to her, stirring her tea in absent circles. Every now and then, I'd catch her glancing at me, not with judgment, not with calculation, just watching, as if still trying to understand how the daughter she had once dismissed had become someone worth knowing. And then, there was my father. He didn't say much. He never did. But at one point, as I reached for my glass, I saw his hand move too, ever so slightly, like he had thought about pulling my plate closer to him, like he had once done when I was a child. The gesture was so small, so insignificant to anyone else, but in that moment, it nearly stopped me cold. 14 years ago, I had walked away from this family believing they would never change. I was wrong. They didn't ask for me to come back. They didn't beg for my forgiveness, but they changed. Quietly, steadily, and in ways that mattered. I set my glass down and met my father's eyes. And this time, neither of us looked away. I wasn't sure how the night would end, but when the check came, my mother reached for it first. Not because she felt obligated. Not because she was trying to prove a point. She just wanted to. And for the first time, I let her. People always assume that closure comes with an apology. That you need to hear, I was wrong, in order to heal. But that's not true. I never needed my family to say the words. I just needed them to change. And that's the story of Vivian Hart, the daughter they dismissed, the visionary they ignored, and the woman they could no longer deny. From being cast aside for choosing her own path to becoming a leader in AI, she didn't just prove them wrong. She proved herself right. In the end, she didn't need their approval. But maybe, just maybe, they had finally learned how to give it. But this isn't just a story, it's real. This post was originally shared on r/TrueOffMyChest, where thousands of people reveal the raw, unfiltered truths about family, love, and betrayal. So, what would you do in Vivian's place? Could you forgive a family that only saw your worth after the world did? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more real stories like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for Reddit True Vault, because some stories don't just deserve to be told, they deserve to be heard.